And a very good day to you. This is Eric Magidson, and this is Chapter 8, Managing Project Stakeholders and Communication Lecture Series for CIS 244, Project Management / Systems Analysis and Design. First of all, let me apologize. I have a cold. It is annoying. I will try to pause before I cough into the microphone. But if not, let me go ahead and apologize ahead of time. So let's get started on Chapter 8. So, of course, we've talked about different aspects, definitely have talked about communication. We're going to dive more deeply into that. We're going to definitely talk about the informal organization. So we can think of this sort of as the underlying or real culture of the organization, meaning what we say in our mission statement may not be how the company actually operates. Okay, so we'll talk more about that. Developing stakeholder analysis. We'll look at all these outcomes. I would encourage you to pause real quick and read through those, and then we'll get started. So as we look at this, while the formal organizational structure, some sort of organizational chart, if you will, tells us how individuals or groups within the organization should relate to one another, the fact is there is definitely an underlying actuality for how people relate. Now, if in growing up you remember things like cliques and the sports group that hung around and the computer nerd group that hung around and the musician group that hung around, okay, those were the groups I hung around with. You get the idea. That's what happens within an organization. It can happen within a department. It can happen within a sub-department of a department, or it can happen cross departments. Okay. So as we look at the organizational chart, let's keep in mind that these informal relationships happen within the company. Now, here's an example. So, they tend to bypass the formal lines of communication and authority. So, we see this office politics, if you will. Power is determined by how well one is connected to an informal network. What's the grapevine network, if you will. And this all affects projects and project management. Because, of course, if you think about it, those people with that pseudo power, if you will, become influencers. Okay, up and above the organizational chart and who you would expect to find as the influencers. So, how does this person align with this person? If this person is, say, on the team, then it's a good chance that this person's initiatives, goals, etc., are going to be a priority for this person. Now, of course, this happens a lot more when, say, you work directly under somebody or with somebody. Okay, so this is just a realistic thing about business. Whether you have a business degree or not, no matter what organization you've worked in, even if it's fast food, if you stop and really consider it, you see these informal organizations that form within the formal organization. So, stakeholders, when we talk about stakeholders, let's expand our thoughts on stakeholders here for a minute. Because stakeholders, when we think about it, tend to be the leaders of an organization, tend to be the higher ups, the ones that are financing the projects that we're doing, okay? And that's not always the case. So, we need to consider all the stakeholders. One of the primary stakeholders to consider when doing an IT project is the end user. We really need to get that end user involved. They're the ones that are going to actually do the work. They're the ones that are going to take the action where the leaders, the managers, are going to manage and do so with words. The data or whatever system we're creating is really going to be operated by those end users. And then management is going to pull reports and things out of that system. So we need to make sure that we consider all the stakeholders, especially those that are going to use the product. If we produce a product that makes it hard for an end user to do their job, they're not going to put the data in that the higher up stakeholders need. So we need to think about who really are all the stakeholders. How does it affect our community? Maybe it affects our society, the owners, our customers, our employees, those being the end users, suppliers, lenders, government. Years ago, we put a new agency management system into an insurance agency that I worked for. And that system was so unreliable and down that we started losing customers when our business customers were calling for things like certificates of insurance so that they could sign contracts to do work to pay our insurance costs. And we couldn't produce that. So, that's something to think about. It's not always just the customer that is the stakeholder. It's not always the person paying the bill, paying the invoice that is the stakeholder. Okay, so when we talk about stakeholder analysis process, we develop a list of stakeholders, who have an interest in the success or unsuccessful outcome of the project. So, i.e., do we have people who literally want to see the project fail? Maybe they had a different initiative. Maybe they wanted a different way of doing the project. Maybe they chose a different software and they're just so stuck on it that they hope one project fails so that they can get their project initiated. Or it's a completely different project that got funded, thus theirs didn't. So you get the idea. So we develop that list, we identify the stakeholders, 1 for a positive interest, 0 for a neutral interest, -1 for a negative interest. Now let's be very clear. There may be a stakeholder analysis that is shared with the project team, and then there may be one that is done, shared with limited people on that informal organization, okay? So that we really analyze the risk of the stakeholders who are in fact involved in our project. We have to look at this realistically. So then we determine the degree of influence each stakeholder has on a scale of 0, no influence, to 10. That's, one scale. You could do 0 to 5. Define a role of each stakeholder. So you see down here, I've given you some examples, and I would encourage you to pause this and look at these examples of stakeholders. Contributors, reviewers, scorers, approvers, project manager, of course, is a huge stakeholder in the project. Even if they're a consultant who's managing the project, they're getting paid. There is a result of their work that they want to continue. And thus they are, in fact, a stakeholder and a hard influencer on the project or project success. Okay, so we determine the degree, we define a role of each stakeholder. Are they champion, consultant, decision maker, ally, rival, foe? Realistically, again, not everyone that's going to be assigned to the project team is going to want the project to succeed. You would hope that would be the case. And if that's not the case, we need to have the courage to ask those people off the bus, off the project bus, if you will. As we do this stakeholder analysis, identify an objective for each stakeholder, provide resources, guidance, expertise, acceptance, approval. What is the role of the stakeholder? So this is a nice slide, project manager, project team, who's the sponsor, who are the contractors, realize contractors are being paid to do the work, staff is being paid to do the work. Managers want to see it succeed so that the business is more successful. Okay, owners want to see it succeed because they're in business to make money, and they're now spending money to try to make more money. Thus, they're the big stakeholder, right? How is the community, the media, the regulation? A great example of this is how did the media influence the success of the National Healthcare website, that was created when it was late, when it was over budget? Didn't they, in fact, put this idea in everyone's head that it was a terrible product right out of the gate because it was late, because it didn't meet its needs? And maybe that was the factual information, don't get me wrong. But in fact, they were a stakeholder as well, okay? Outside, right? Not an influencer, not, their decisions didn't matter. But in fact, the public in that case, they were all stakeholders. We were paying taxes to make that happen. So that's just an example. So identify the objective for each person or, each stakeholder. What are they there to do with the project? Also remember, realistic objective may be someone who clearly was not on board, now as part of the project team. And how do we deal with that person? How do we get that person to suddenly refocus their efforts from whatever they thought we should do to what it was determined that we are going to do? Identify a strategy for each. Is it build, maintain, improve, reestablish? What is the value for each stakeholder that they will receive from the project? and from the ending result of the project. So if you notice here, here's just a quick example of, a stakeholder, their interest, their role in the project. I also like to include their role in the organization. Okay. So, are they a manager? Are they an end user? Are they the owner? What is the case? So, here you see, their interest, their influence, and then, more information. So, any potential conflicts, role, we want to get that all out. We don't want to hold anything back, if you will. So as we look to monitor and control the project, regardless of how well a project is planned, unexpected situations happen. Somebody gets sick, ends up in the hospital. Somebody has an accident. If it's a large project, we may actually want to ensure the people on the project, it's called key personnel insurance, and you can actually buy it. So if there's a key person that this project is hugely relying on, we may want to insure that person because the risk of that person not completing the project may be high, and it may be worth buying that insurance. Remember, people get sick. I think I've said in previous videos, go to HR and ask HR, how many sick days a month does this person take, and build that into your expectation of work days for that person, so that we are realistic about that, so that that one person doesn't put our project team behind. Project manager will not lose credibility because of unexpected events. I don't necessarily agree with that. A project manager will not lose credibility if they are not responsible for the unexpected event. But if the project manager knows that they put somebody on the team that is risky, that is not supportive of the team, whatever the case may be, there may be some backlash. So it is something to consider. We need to get all of these things, if you will, out in the open. Project communication plan can be formal or informal. I like a formal communication plan. How are we going to communicate? What's the frequency? You see an example down below. Okay, so project status reports. Well, they're going to be emailed. They're going to be done weekly. What's the goal, owner, etc. Now, I want to bring some new tools in here. Just like this lecture that you're listening to, where there's a video, we can actually create and say more with an audio or an audio plus video like this, a screen capture thing, to work through that daily report, okay? Instead of something for people to read. The fact that students don't read emails, that goes into when they get into the workforce too. I hear it all the time. My employees aren't reading emails. Well, we have these tools where we could create a 2-minute video that says much more than an email and make sure that they watch it. So, when we think about creative ways of communication, we have amazing ways to communicate. Don't forget things like Microsoft Teams, or Slack. Those are great ways to communicate, outside of these standard things like meetings and, team Gantt charts, and etc. But this is a great chart for you to reference in the future as to how we create a communication plan. And I am a fan of a formal communication plan because, again, that holds the responsibility in place for the people that are communicating to meet those obligations that they have set. So stakeholders, of course, when we talk about communication plan, key areas, who are the stakeholders, information requirements, what information do we need to share, what's the frequency of that information. We tend to focus on the scope of the project, where we are within the schedule, where we are within the budget, what's the quality we're receiving, are there any new risks? As a project, over time, new risks will present themselves within a project. So are we addressing any change in our existing risks or changing our time frame to implement new risks? If we lose a key person to, pancreatic flare-up or something for a week in the hospital, well, that puts our project behind. So, have we determined and continue to look at that? And again, I'm going to say, folks, please keep in mind that at any point, I think the one thing you should be asking each day is today the day we stop this project? When we start looking at things like, and maybe it's stop it so we can go back and better adjust the scope, better adjust the budget. Maybe it's not that the project needs to fail and we start over, but it's literally, okay, whoa, we are going down the wrong path and we are doing it so quickly that we need to just stop. So definitely something to keep in mind. Okay, let me finish this slide. So information requirements, go ahead and pause, read this type of report or metric we're going to give. Again, think creatively. It may be an MP3, it may be an audio of the report that people can read to and from on their way to work or consume that they consumed it. Timings, and availabilities, medium or format, how are we going to do this? And of course, let's keep in mind that still today, the best form of communication is face-to-face. It is how most communication that is successful happens. We see if the other person is listening. We get to listen to the other person. We get to see their body language, their timing, their tone, their tact, to see if they really understand what our requirements are for them as it pertains to the project, whether it's a stakeholder or somebody deeply involved. All right, we'll catch up on the next one, and we'll start right here. Take care.